Good evening, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Srimati Uma Tiwari, Aditi, Pragya, and Anurag, I welcome you to the launch of the book An Unfinished Journey by late Ambassador Yogesh M. Tiwari. Yogesh ji's great-grandfather was the Raja of Sahajpur, Sagar district in Madhya Pradesh, who lost his life in the First War of Independence in 1857 against the British rule. After losing her husband, his grandmother came to Jabalpur with her children. This is where Yogesh ji was born to a very distinguished and well-respected father who was the principal of Hitkari school. He excelled in mathematics. He did his bachelor's degree at the Government Science College, Jabalpur, and won a scholarship to St. Stephen's College in Delhi. He turned down a scholarship to Cambridge University for a doctorate and chose to become a civil servant. He entered the Indian Foreign Services in 1966. In 1971, he married Uma Shukla, daughter of Pandit Shamacharan Shukla, the then Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh. In 1988, Mr. Tiwari became one of the youngest Indian ambassadors of his time, and during his foreign service career, headed the Indian missions in Austria, Slovenia, Cyprus, Kenya, Eritrea, and Singapore. Mr. Tiwari led the division which handled Gorbachev's landmark visit to India in 1986 and was posted as High Commissioner to Singapore during India's opening to ASEAN in the early 90s. He represented India in the IAEA following the 1998 Pokhran-II nuclear test explosions. Ambassador Tiwari was a distinct breed of diplomat, a rich combination of patriotism, idealism, and realpolitik. He was an avid golfer and a bridge player and loved Hindustani and Western classical music, Russian literature, and Urdu poetry. Ambassador Tiwari passed away in late 2019 and is survived by his wife Uma, their 3 children, Saloni, Bulbul, and Anurag, and 2 grandchildren, Ameya and Vyom. Today, for his book release, we are honored to have with us as our chief guest, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Honorable Member of Parliament, Shri Natwar, former Minister of External Affairs, Government of India, who is our guest of honor, Ambassador Shyam Saran, President IAEA, Ambassador Vijay Nambiar, former Under Secretary General UN, Srimati Uma Tiwari, and Shri Anurag Tiwari. May I request them to kindly take the places on the dais. We would like to extend a floral welcome to our honored guests. May I request Ambassador Tiwari's son, Shri Anurag Tiwari, to kindly present bouquets to our chief guest, Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Shri Natwar. Ambassador Shyam Saran. And Ambassador Vijay Nambiar. I first request Shri Anurag Tiwari to kindly speak a few words by way of welcoming our distinguished guests.
Thank you very much. That was really lovely. Dear respected day's guests, friends and family members, colleagues of my father, and other members of the Foreign Service community, I'm very proud to be here to represent my father tonight. Thank you for the honor of your presence, Minister Singh, Dr. Tharoor, Ambassador Nambiar, and Ambassador Saran. Papa enjoyed writing his memoirs a great deal. When I first read them, even in their initially disorganized state, I could hear and feel the passion that he'd had for his work. The draft we had after Papa passed away was in a rough state. Papa was accustomed to help from the punctilious Foreign Service clerical staff he'd had for 40 years and was rather unprepared for the world of do-it-yourself post-retirement. The draft was largely unedited. Papa preferred to dictate, to think on his feet. That was his style, to compose in his head and dictate to someone who'd capture what he'd said. He was precise, and made very few corrections. It's okay. You can switch your phones off whenever you feel like. In some ways, I think the simplicity and directness of the language in the book has to do with the way that Papa had his letters and papers typed by a PA who was not as erudite, and to avoid mistakes and save time, Papa chose language which was simple and unadorned. Even though he loved language and crossword puzzles and Scrabble, but when he had papers or chapters to write, he went for a simple, indirect style. I helped Papa write up his white paper on 2005 Indo-US nuclear deal, which is in the book. And it was kind of amazing how he composed a very technical document with hardly any corrections, standing on his feet, pacing back and forth, consulting notes only when it came to things like references to legislation. So for me, a part of his personality the book does not capture is how he'd alight on a note of humor, of gentle and funny innuendo, wordplay and ribbing. Excuse me. The book doesn't capture his ability to laugh and joke and find fun in so much of what he saw around him. In the book, Papa's a little bit more serious than I think he was in real life, although he was incredibly serious about his work and clearly loved India. After he'd passed away, working on editing his memoirs was an escape for me. I'd get to step back a few decades to remember lovely times for us as a family and my father's diplomatic postings, and to hear his voice in my head again after he was gone. Excuse me. And that was really my effort in this book as its editor, to restore his language and manner of expression wherever that had been effaced by a sloppy transcriber. But what I found remarkable was just how much Papa remembered. The book mentions his Moscow posting with Ambassador D.P. Dhar, for example, and he incredibly managed to remember the name 50 years later of a song by a great gypsy singer he invited to India, a song Nikolai sang at a get-together Ambassador Rumesh Bhandari organized in Moscow in the 60s. In today's internet age, to find that track and to lightly correct the names Papa remembered 50 years later was kind of a joy. To remember a young Yogesh Tiwari who had a Beatles vinyl collection in a Moscow, starved for their music, and had lots of parties in his flat, who drove fast and got into a pretty bad accident, my mother tells me, and who loved Russian language and literature and people. To me, editing the book was very much a revisitation of my childhood, of stepping back into these wonderful countries and cultures and peoples, and being a part of the wonderful life that foreign service people get to have, even if they're just lowly IFS brats like me, but blessed to have parents like my father and mother. I hope the book does well. Do please buy a copy. We have them for sale here tonight. I think it's a fabulous read and has so much of what made Papa's job interesting. Great people and stories, history, meaning, and always that hallowed idea of India as a great nation and people. So a heady mix. Thank you very much for being here and celebrating my father's life and work.
Thank you very much. I now request Ambassador Shyam Saran, President of IAEA, to kindly make his opening remarks.
That caught me by surprise because I was supposed to be at the end of the... Anyway. Srimati Uma Tiwari ji, members of the Ambassador Tiwari's family, my peer, Dr. Natwar Singhji, also a friend, Shashi Tharoor ji, and a very dear friend and colleague, Ambassador Vijay Nambiar. It is a great honor for me to have this opportunity of being present here this evening to honor the memory of one of our very distinguished Foreign Service colleagues, Ambassador Yogesh Tiwari ji. I must confess that I did not have the privilege of working together with him, but I certainly did have occasions where I was able to exchange opinions with him, views with him, and I must say that I think what his son said, that quite apart from being someone who had a very, very, I would say, a very deep sort of familiarity with issues of foreign policy, of security. He also had a great sense of humor. And he had a somewhat bemused view of the world around him. So it was always a pleasure to actually talk to him. The book that has been edited by his family members is really quite a remarkable read. I had read some portions of it. I think he had done an oral history project, if I'm not mistaken. And that itself was of great interest when it was published. And I think that may have also perhaps encouraged him, the reaction to it might have encouraged him to perhaps try something more ambitious. And I think this book is really a very great contribution, I would say, to understanding India's foreign policy. And also during a particular period where one may say that these are also certain formative years for India's foreign policy. Another very important juncture that I think he straddled was the period, from about 91, 92, when there was for India, many people do not realize that this was a great departure from the past. Some very important anchors of our foreign policy. The Indo-Soviet partnership, for example, or the kind of economic strategy that we had followed for several years during this period of the first 30 or 40 years of our existence. India was faced with a very, very difficult situation when that transition took place. Today, perhaps we don't even think about that transition very much because it happened actually very smoothly, in a sense. So, as I was saying, it was a period of remarkable change, which, to my mind, was actually handled with remarkable deftness, I would say. And that is why we don't really think very much about it. And it is that particular period of transition that Ambassador Yogesh Tiwari, some of it he has covered in the book. For example, the reaction to this change, as I said, the importance of the Central Asian countries, the India's look east policy. It would be fair to say, reading the book, that the initial idea about reaching out to ASEAN, reaching out to East Asia, was something that he, in a sense, that particular policy he pioneered in some ways. Or, for example, handling the fallout from India's nuclear tests in 1998. These were very, very difficult situations that diplomats had to handle, and I must say, from what we read in the book, he did a tremendous job as a diplomat handling these very difficult situations. I also feel that his book is a very good, I would say, almost a textbook for young diplomats. Really, from these very practical experiences that he has related in the book, really how to handle crisis situations, or how to make certain that we don't get frozen in bureaucraties, which is very likely in our kind of work. There are several occasions where he has, in fact, not allowed that kind of bureaucratic or a kind of weddedness to regulation and rules to prevent one from doing what one considers to be right and considers to be, the appropriate action to take. So it's in that sense, I think it is a very good guide for young diplomats as well. Let me take this occasion to also join in the celebration of what is a life well lived and a diplomat whose, I think, achievements are really worth celebrating. So thank you very much for your attention. And once again, I would like to congratulate Srimati Uma Tiwari ji and to members of his family for really taking his legacy forward in this manner. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador Shyam Saranji. I now request Ambassador Vijay Nambiar, former Under Secretary General, United Nations, to kindly speak on the occasion.
Thank you. We've heard from Shyam. Like Shyam, I cannot, ladies and gentlemen, claim to have been part of any intimate circle of Yogesh's friends. I joined the service 1 year after he did. We never served together on any foreign posts or missions. And in headquarters, our postings did overlap once or twice. But I had not been in continuous contact with him over any great period of time. Our meetings were occasional and episodic. Yet, during the times we met, I always felt we shared an extraordinary equation and that we managed to develop a friendship, even an affection for each other. Looking back on our meetings, I recall 3 strong impressions of his personality. One, Yogesh possessed an intellectual precocity that was quite extraordinary. He had an intuitive grasp of issues and could master even complexities very quickly. I think his mathematical brain ensured that. However, unlike other brilliant persons, he was not given to endless argumentation, flashy rhetoric, or casuistry, to use a Tharoorism. He sized up issues quickly and distilled them into clear, incisive, and succinct propositions or arguments. 2, I was also struck by his acute sensitivity to changing situations in the country and around the world, and his ability to crisply identify their immediate and longer-term implications. He possessed what I would call an inductive mind that pieced together different individual developments and discerned from them clear and definite trends. These are the qualities which a quintessential diplomat possesses, and he had them in abundant measure. That is evident in the pages of the book. 3, what struck me most of all his attributes was his strong rootedness to the soil of his birth, to the traditions, thinking patterns, and ethos of India, I'd say mainly North India, even while he was able to adjust himself personally to the thinking habits and social practices of all places around the world. It is no surprise that his memoirs should reflect these qualities. Many of them have already, I think, you'll have seen them and you'll probably see them referred to by many of the people who will speak today. Let me refer to just some. Yogesh's account of his first posting in Moscow and his personal, professional, as well as intellectual engagements with a political personality of the stature of D.P. Dhar, who was ambassador in Moscow and who designated Yogesh, then the youngest officer in the mission, as his private secretary, are striking. He refers to D.P. Saab as a unique mentor and relates many interactions with D.P. Saab where he was able to relate with him freely and with confidence. This account of a relationship between a fledgling junior and his head of mission resonated well with me because in my own posting to Beijing in 1970 after my language training in Chinese, I too experienced a similar sense of awe and respect, but also encouragement to display freedom and confidence in expressing my views in front of my then head of mission, Mr. B.C. Mishra, who became my first mentor in the service. I think I have a person who was there then with me in the audience, Kishan Rana. This period of the early 70s was a period of seismic shifts across the world. When the Sino-Soviet split erupted into open clashes on the border in Ussuri, China turned towards the US. We all know of Kissinger's visit in July 1971, which resulted in a major shift in China's external policies, a development that Pakistan helped to broker. We are also aware of the crisis that erupted in the subcontinent as a result of Pakistan's genocide in East Bengal, the birth of Bangladesh and the Indo-Pakistan War in 1971. In this war, despite strong pressure from the US on China to enter the war, on Pakistan's side, this did not happen. The main reason for this, which appears in Yogesh's memoirs, was the Indo-Soviet Treaty of Friendship, largely crafted by Dhar Sahib and others. But another reason, which was not mentioned in Yogesh's book, was the uncertainty and instability within China, within the PLA after the Lin Biao incident. Ambassador Mishra's clear assessment to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi that China would not intervene in the war was another factor that helped clinch the issue for India to strike decisively and to win the war in 1970. Other than what he talked to with T.P. Dhar Sahib and the discussions he had even after that in 1971. Other initiatives were Yogesh's superb organization of Indira Gandhi's path-breaking visit to Saudi Arabia in April 82, his diligent efforts in the Indo-Soviet nuclear parleys in the mid-80s, and most notably, the frustrations he faced with the Look East policy he first initiated in a paper to the MEA as High Commissioner in Singapore, which remained sadly unacknowledged and unacted upon for several years. Incipient in Ambassador Tiwari's account in this volume is his strong sense of loyalty to his service. This comes out on many occasions, even where he does not flinch from speaking frankly about the differences he had with many of his colleagues in the service, both senior and junior. We are all aware of the strong reaction of the IFS Association in the aftermath of the public humiliation of the Foreign Secretary Venkateshwaran by Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi and the role Yogesh played in articulating that reaction. This is mentioned by him in the book in some detail, as also the numerous brushes and contestations he had with other colleagues on a range of issues. At the same time, Yogesh speaks warmly of his personal rapport with the late Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. While details of some of the events he describes may be recalled differently by other protagonists, Yogesh did not shy from projecting forthrightly his own views on these events. Finally, the book also highlights Yogesh's many splendored personality and attributes, which come out in full play both in the many missions he served as well as on occasion in Delhi. His many-sided talents as a wine taster, a masterful near professional in bridge, as well as his strong personal connections he built with personalities like Zubin Mehta, Raja Ramanna, etc., which come out in the book. His account of these interactions provide many heartwarming moments in the book and help bring zest, meaning, and credit to the larger role played by an Indian ambassador or envoy abroad. I cannot end without paying my tribute to Uma Tiwari for her perseverance and dedication in bringing out this volume after Yogesh so suddenly departed from our midst. Together with the children, Uma struggled courageously to help her late husband finally close the page, as it were, on his unfinished journey. My sincere greetings to her, as well as to Saloni, Bulbul, and Anurag. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Nambiar. I now invite our guest of honor, Shri K. Natwar Singh, for his special address.
Uma ji, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Shyam Saran ji, Nambiar ji. Ladies and gentlemen, when I heard that I was to speak after Shashi Tharoor, I made up my mind to tell the organizer that this was my day of silence. Now there have been 3 outstanding and eloquent orators in India. Dr. Radhakrishnan, Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and the fourth is sitting here. I knew Yogesh reasonably well. He brought the manuscript of the book to me. I think it was 2000. Incidentally, I am 93 years old, so forgive me. Anybody 93 here? I belong to the gerontocracy of the Foreign Service. Krishna Rasgotra is 98, very fit. Eric Gonzalez is 94, he lives in Bangalore. I am 93, and Ashok Gokhale is 92. All the others of our age have passed away. But I am pretty active for my age, a good memory. But I am good at forgetting names and remembering faces. और मैं क्या कह रहा था, मुझे पता नहीं क्या कह रहा था मैं, क्या कुछ बताइए क्या कह रहा था मैं? हाँ, we brought the manuscript to me. I read it and I told him this won't do. You got to rewrite it. So this is the rewritten product. And I would request you all to buy the book and read it. Because there is so much in it. Especially his years in various embassies. One day, Rajiv Gandhi, in a press conference, answering a question from a Pakistani diplomat, he had said that your Foreign Secretary, Mr. Venkateshwaran, has made some observations about Pakistan. So Rajiv said, we very shortly have a new Foreign Secretary. There was dead silence. I was there now on a visit to Moscow. I was the Minister of State. So I, staying with T.N. Kaul, and P.N. Aksar was also there. So anyway, I caught the first flight and came back to India and went straight to Rajiv. And I said, how could you do this? And Rajiv said, कि मुझे तो पता नहीं था वो वहाँ बैठा है. अरे मैंने कहा अगर वो बैठा हुआ नहीं था तब भी तो नहीं कहने की ज़रूरत थी कि he is your principal foreign affairs advisor. And मैंने कहा you have, there is a stink. And people are literally after your blood. Now, what do you think Shri Yogesh Tiwari did? He collected his friends, and Sibbal was the Foreign Secretary. And he said that we have to protest about what the Prime Minister has done to our senior colleague, Foreign Secretary. I got to know. So I said for Yogesh. मैंने कहा तुम क्या समझते हो ये कोई फॉरेन सर्विस ट्रेड यूनियन है? मेरे को बिल्कुल नहीं करना ये. उन्होंने कहा सर ये तो हो ही नहीं सकता, बेइज्जती हुई है बन कर रहा, वी आर गोइंग टू डू इट. सो आई वेंट टू सी राजीव. मैंने कहा दिस आई हैव स्टॉप्ड इट, but the feeling in the ministry is very, very strong. Then he said, मैं क्या करूं? मैंने कहा आप कुछ मत करिए, खामोश बैठ रहिए आप. Then a day later, an article appeared in the Indian Express written by L.P. Singh, who was one of the outstanding Home Secretaries of India. He had then retired. And in that article, he went for Rajiv. No holds barred. And L.P. Singh was a highly respected person, and I knew him quite well. So I took the article to Rajiv. I said, have you read it? He said, तुम पढ़ लो. अरे मैंने कहा मैंने तो पढ़ लिया, आप तो पढ़ लीजिए इसको. तो उसने कहा नहीं. तो मैंने कहा आपकी I need your permission to go and see L.P. Singhji because he is going to write another one tomorrow. So L.P. Singh used to live in Vasant Vihar. So I went to see him. तो कौन नटवर कैसे हो, क्या कर सकता हूँ? मैंने कहा आपने जितनी गाली दे सकते थे आप राजीव गांधी आपने दे ली है. दूसरा आर्टिकल मत लिखिए आप. उनका दैट्स नॉट पॉसिबल. He has humiliated the entire civil service, and this is not acceptable to not only me, but entire civil service. All of us are in Vasant Vihar, about 50 of us live here. So I spent 2 hours arguing with him. कि आप प्लीज मत लिखिए, ये आपने जो कह दिया. So with great difficulty, he didn't write it, because the second one was much worse than the first one. He showed me the draft. Then I told Rajiv, you have almost put an end to your prime ministership. मैंने आपसे कोई नहीं कहा. I am not defending Venkateshwaran because Venkateshwaran used to be sometimes very flippant, including in the presence of Rajiv Gandhi. And one day he had a file, he just threw it across the table to Prime Minister. So Rajiv got red in the face, absolutely. So I called Venkat and देखो, your flippancy you could get away with in Rajiv's time because she liked you. Rajiv doesn't like you. And if you don't look out, he's going to throw you out. That he was an extremely likable person. I'd known him since 1952-53. But he couldn't resist cracking a joke. And some of them were funny and some of them were not so funny. And in any case, if you didn't know the Prime Minister as well, for example, as I did, I knew Rajiv very well. I knew him when he was about 6 years old. Since then, well, he's the Prime Minister of India and you must behave yourself. You got away once when we were for the SAG summit in Bangalore in 1986. And Venkat had announced to the press that the Prime Minister of India will be going to Pakistan. So Rajiv sent for me, he said, I'm not going to Pakistan. So I asked Venkat, how do you know that he's going to Pakistan? He said, I thought he will, so I said it. That was the first error he made. Rajiv Gandhi had just first time really met him in the SARC summit. There were not too many people in those days. Then he told me कि इसको कह दो कि ऐसी बातें नहीं किया करें आगे. So then I told him, मैंने कहा you stop this, doing all this. But he didn't. But he was in the Foreign Service, greatly liked. He was very helpful. He was not pompous. He didn't show off. Just as Yogesh, one of the nicest human beings I ever met. Good professional diplomat, well read, He was first class first in all his examinations. He was in St. Stephen's College for a year, and as somebody said, they refused the scholarship to Cambridge and joined the Indian Foreign Service. I used to see him off and on, and I realized that he was, apart from being a good Foreign Service officer, that he was a very decent human being, a very likable human being, sophisticated human being, proud of the fact that he was the Indian Foreign Service officer. If you read the book, as I've said that you must buy and read it, you will realize that you are in the company of a very exceptional human being. I don't say that about very many people, and because my conceit is well known. When I was Deputy High Commissioner in London, I was invited to a Founders' Day of a school. And like a fool, I asked the headmaster, "What would you like me to speak about?" And he said, "About 5 minutes." But I have exceeded 5 minutes. So please forgive me, and thank you very much for listening to me.
It is my privilege to request our Chief Guest, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Honourable Member of Parliament, to kindly render the keynote address.
Respected Shri Natwar Singhji, who's really an impossible act to follow, starting with his extraordinarily kind words, which are impossible to live up to, and then the wit with which he addressed the issue. Mrs. Tiwari, Ambassador Shyam Saran, my good friend Vijay Nambiar, who unveiled me into this exercise, and Anurag, whom I'm meeting today for the first time. The very many distinguished diplomats and others in the audience whom I recognize and respect, friends. It's really extraordinary to be here today with such a galaxy of luminaries from our Foreign Service to celebrate the memoir of a diplomat who is not with us. It really was for me a particularly surprising request that amidst them that I was asked to speak to you all today, because I didn't really know Ambassador Tiwari. I met him very briefly once in Vienna when I accompanied UN Secretary General Kofi Annan there. But he really met with Kofi Annan, not with Shashi Tharoor, so we didn't really have a conversation. And I must say that when the Tiwari family reached out to me, and my good friend Vijay Nambiar absolutely insisted that I oblige, I looked at the manuscript with some diffidence, because I must admit that bureaucratic memoirs in India do not have, shall we say, an entirely happy track record. And for various reasons that I wouldn't go into. But this is, as Natwar Sahab has made very clear, this is an unusually interesting, simple, direct, and accessible piece of work. And I can say this, to quote Vijay, without any casuistry, because it's a book that's full of anecdotes. One can see that much of it must have been dictated, because he really does write as you might speak. And so you really have the sense of sitting around for a conversation, perhaps with a drink after dinner, hearing a raconteur tell you some of his best stories. And that, to my mind, is what has made this book so particularly engaging. There are some very strong policy points, and I'll mention a couple in a minute. But there's also lots and lots of stories, and they're told with a certain amount of verve, which I believe the reader will find utterly engaging. And without any malice or rancor. Not every comment made about every individual is always, shall we say, unalloyed praise, but nonetheless there isn't any nastiness, there isn't any sort of savagery to any of the comments. He describes situations, good and bad, with I would say, a very, very kind spirit. And there's an enormous amount there that will reward people who are curious about that period of Indian diplomacy. Because we went through enormous changes at the time. We've lived through an era in which a lot of Indian foreign policy was transformed. It's fascinating to realize that Ambassador Tiwari was the heart of one of the transformations. The Look East policy, the opening to Southeast Asia, that Prime Minister Narasimha Rao is credited with in the early 90s, was in many ways constructed by and out of the mind of Ambassador Tiwari, and his ideas, the points he made, the rationale, and his own cultivation of good relations with Singapore during his posting there in the late 80s, all contributed immensely to this policy becoming feasible. And indeed, the way in which Singapore did a lot for us in constructing the opening to the rest of ASEAN is in many ways a tribute to the way in which Ambassador Tiwari had reached out to the Singaporeans on this matter. There's also lots of other stories. His role in Vienna when he was ambassador to the IAEA, the Atomic Energy Agency, at the time of the Pokhran blast and the aftermath of it. And I think without being too immodest, he makes it very clear that his way of managing the arguments over the Indian blast at that time, where India and Pakistan actually made common cause at the IAEA and got the support of some of the developing countries, notably the South African ambassador at that time, to challenge the P5's holier-than-thou attitude by pointing out, not unreasonably, that the P5, who were touting the virtues of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, had never lived up to the first part of it, which required them to contribute towards universal nuclear disarmament, which they had not done. And that argument essentially neutralized the P5 stand in Vienna, whereas in New York at the General Assembly, we did considerably worse in the debate. And Ambassador Tiwari describes this in some detail. His role in saving UNIDO, the UN Industrial Development Organization, is also delightfully described. And there is one episode he talks about which I was struck by because it had some parallels with one of my own experiences, was when he was invited by a number of ambassadors to put himself forward for the position of Director General of UNIDO. And he declined, and his rationale is given very well in the book. It had a lot to do with domestic matters in India, and his conviction that he wouldn't be supported back in India either by the Foreign Ministry or by the Industry Ministry, which saw the Industrial Development Organization as its own preserve. So he declined, and then he was pressed by several ambassadors, and he decided then that he would ask for a few days to consult the capital. But without consulting the capital, he gave them the same answer a few days later and had no regret, because he's convinced that in his analysis it would have been an unwise thing for him to do, and he would have made more enemies than friends. He recounts somewhat ruefully that some of the people he was afraid he would make enemies of, he did end up making enemies of anyway for other reasons. But it's an interesting thing because, some years later when I was also approached by a number of ambassadors and by our own government at the time, I was much more, shall we say, willing to acquiesce in this thing, and I wonder whether I should have also proved capable of the good sense and self-criticism that Ambassador Tiwari was when he was put in the position of UNIDO. There is, as a couple of speakers have already mentioned, a reference to the stands he took that perhaps may have attracted adverse attention higher up the hierarchy, including the position that he took on the abrupt dismissal by Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi of Foreign Secretary Venkateshwaran in the middle of a press conference, which involved Yogesh, Tiwari, and a couple of other colleagues calling the Foreign Service officers together. And Natwar Sahab, who was by then MOS and no longer in the service, was invited to attend and did. And there is a lovely story in Natwar Sahab, which I'm sure you would not demur from since you haven't, which says that Natwar Sahab said to them, "Why are you people doing this? If you do this kind of thing, you'll be sent off to Mongolia." And apparently a young diplomat stood up and said, "Sir, there is only one Mongolia and there are so many of us. We are going to do this together." And that story is recounted. They're full of stories of this nature in the book. And indeed, Ambassador Tiwari, who after all had got these people together to criticize the Prime Minister, goes on to record that there were no adverse consequences as a result of this action, and he praises the graciousness of the Prime Minister for not having reacted adversely and for having respected the Foreign Service for having stood by one of its own. And I think that's again a wonderful quality of the Foreign Service, though I've never been part of it. I've had the opportunity over many decades of interacting with very many of the Foreign Service members in this room and many not in this room. And I will say that they genuinely are an exceptional elite service in our system. And if there is a certain clannishness that comes with that, I think they've earned it. And in many ways, I took that perception with me when I chaired the Foreign Affairs Committee of Parliament for 5 years, during which, with the assistance and abetment of the Venerable Dr. Karan Singh, we lobbied very hard to get the Foreign Service a distinctive treatment from the UPSC. And many of us were appalled by some of the kinds of officers who were getting into the Foreign Service in recent years, who were simply not up to the kinds of standards that the careers of the gentleman on the podium and of Ambassador Tiwari would reflect. And we suggested that if there could not be a separate examination for the Foreign Service, there should at least be a separate interview for those who expressed a desire to join the service, because we were accepting a lot of people who would much rather be in the IPS or even the Revenue Service coming into the Foreign Service without really the innate ability to either acquire mastery over more than one language or to communicate effectively to strangers their points of view. And I think that that dilution of quality might have mattered less in other services than I believe it does matter in the Foreign Service. That's not a battle we won, but it was worth fighting, and it's now there in a report of the Parliamentary Standing Committee of External Affairs, which is a public document, and I hope that one day it might be exhumed and acted upon, as some others of our suggestions have been. But I do want to say that the number of good qualities of Ambassador Tiwari that came through this memoir, which I, as someone who did not have the pleasure of knowing personally, unlike all the others on the podium, truly appreciated. One was certainly his willingness to speak his mind, which features in a large number of anecdotes from the very first chapter when he talks to Ambassador D.P. Dhar and disagrees with him, for example, about communism. And Ambassador Dhar is so impressed with the young man that he then summons the PTI correspondent, who is a communist sympathizer, to join him in this debate with Ambassador Tiwari. And at the end of a 2-hour walk, he concedes to the young man that the young man has won the debate. The word Shastrarth features 2 or 3 times in the memoir because it's obviously something that Ambassador Tiwari really had a taste for. And he never hesitated to speak his mind, whether it was to a senior official, to a minister, or even the Prime Minister. Though he does record one moment in which then Foreign Minister Narasimha Rao looks at him sharply when he suggests something and says, "Young man, are you trying to give me political advice?" And that, Ambassador Tiwari says, was sufficiently chastening that even though he believed he was right, he made it a point to say, "Sir, it's the last time I presume to offer you any political advice." But indeed, the issue, in fact, was what led up to the Look East policy later when Narasimha Rao had become Prime Minister. So Ambassador Tiwari was the man who was vindicated in this story. There are other qualities that come across, including delightful side stories of the role that alcohol played in greasing the path for some relations in Saudi Arabia. I thought that was particularly instructive, given the Saudis' official line on these matters. There was also his talent for bridge, which opened up interesting avenues, including with a gentleman I knew rather well, the then Foreign Minister of Austria, Albert Rohan, or as he calls him throughout, Prince Albert, who was no mean bridge player himself, and playing bridge with the Indian ambassador created a relationship that came in very handy during a number of issues that had arisen during Ambassador Tiwari's time in Vienna. His fondness for golf as well, I think, helped quite a bit. And so there were a number of moments like this that come through, and they're delightful vignettes, which I think, especially those who served in the foreign ministry will appreciate, but those who are curious about the life our diplomats lead will also value. So we have here the memories of somebody who clearly comes across as Natwar Singh Saab said, as a remarkable human being, as a well-read, well-spoken, courageous individual with ideas of his own. And these ideas are not necessarily ideas everybody in his own service would have necessarily agreed with, but he's unashamed and unembarrassed to put them forward. And they're in the book, and two particular notes attached to the book will interest many. One is, of course, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel's famous letter to Nehruji in 1950 about China, which Ambassador Tiwari agrees with and considers much more prescient than the line that Prime Minister Nehru took. And the second is his own note to Mrs. Sonia Gandhi at the time of the Indo-US nuclear deal, in which he strongly opposed it. And these, whether you agree with him or not, and there will be more than one view on these matters, are both interesting indications of the fact that within the service there were people with different points of view, and we're not merely a country where there's a party line imposed from the top that everybody mindlessly follows. One revealing story in particular is of apparently a desire by Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi to open up direct bilateral contacts between the Congress Party and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which Yogesh Tiwari opposed strongly, and how that was resolved through a series of discussions and debates, which finally ended up with the Prime Minister giving in. That's very interestingly described. So there's a lot here to reward the reader. I want to really congratulate the family for having taken the trouble to refine the manuscript, as I believe they had to. It had its rough edges. To put it together, it's in many ways the immediacy of the work still comes through. It's not a fully polished product with a clear-cut beginning and end. It is episodic. It does go off from place to place and anecdote to anecdote, but it's nonetheless extremely readable. And when it has been praised by a man like Natwar Singh Sahab, who has written his own memoirs in so many different forms and styles, his own story, anecdotes, opinions, incidents have all come out in a number of different volumes, I think you know that a man of very high standards has told us that this is a book worth enjoying and worth reading. So I leave you with that thought, and I wish Umaji and the family all success in perpetuating the memory of their beloved husband and father through the publication of this book. Thank you all very much. Jai Hind.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment which has brought us all together this evening, the launch of the book, An Unfinished Journey by late Ambassador Yogesh M. Tiwari. In the end, I request Srimati Uma Tiwari to kindly propose the vote of thanks.
Dear respected Natwar Singhji, Dr. Shashi Tharoor ji, Ambassador Shyam ji, Ambassador Vijay Nambiar ji, and present all my friends, good relatives, and all the Yogesh's friend from golf, bridge, and over the years he made so many friends. Some of them are here. I'm so grateful and thankful for you all to be here to witness and to be part of this event where we are trying to remember Yogesh for what he was. I must say that I had been married almost 50 years before his untimely death. And it has been a roller coaster ride, I would say. Not a single day went without having any kind of excitement or sitting quiet at home. He was always busy with something or the other and wanted to be very active in all aspects of life. Like he will play golf and bridge, of course, but then all the discussions and friends all the time. He was inviting people all over the world where we were posted to our home. Like, for example, he gave me exactly 9 days to organize sit-down dinner for 60 people in our home in Cyprus. We reached there, I still remember, I think we reached there on 9th of August or something, and just after 9 days, he had invited this parliamentary delegation which had come to Cyprus. way back in, I would say, I don't remember exactly the dates, must have been 1996, 97, something like that. And I think I did rise for the occasion for him. And the president of Cyprus had come with his wife, Indian origin wife. And we had very strong, good relations with them and the country. Every posting that we did, I still remember that his personal touch and his warm and very a knack of making friends very easily helped him a lot. And he was a wonderful husband to me. And after his passing, actually, in fact, I would say that I realized what a great man he was. In every way, he was there for me. And I'm so grateful for you all to be with me on this occasion. I wish to thank everybody who has made all the effort to make this event happen. I thank the media coverage people who are here, and I thank the publishers for being with us throughout this. And I have to thank Santosh Kumarji because he gave the idea to my husband. Because my Yogesh used to say that there's no point of writing a book because who reads books? Nobody reads the book of a retired diplomat. There's thousands and millions of books. No, I don't want to write. But I think Santoshji somehow convinced him that you have already given, the oral history documentation has been done in the Sapro house. It's already there for you. Why don't you just get the, the printed version and just print that just for your own happiness, that what you did in your life, it will give you a great happiness maybe. And I'm so happy that he did agree to Santosh Kumarji's advice and it came through. So this book's production has some, I'm grateful to Santosh Kumarji also, and of course to the Indian Association of Indian Diplomats who had this oral history documentation program, which helped him to bring this. And then I must say that I realized after his passing away that he was preparing for 3-4 other subjects which were dear to his heart. So I think this book had given him an idea, yes, he can maybe go on, because he did enjoy reading this book, which was his major first project. And I'm sure wherever he is, he's so happy to see all his golf bridge friends and his colleagues and friends to be with us and celebrate his life this way. I do hope that in future you will all be there for me and for the family. And I thank you everybody to be with us. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we conclude this evening program. Thank you all for being with us this evening. Namaskar.